Let's set our websites on fire in a good way. I remember when I first saw this skewed button animation back in the day. I had no idea things like this could be done, and it really inspired me to learn about what's possible on the web. Later I learned how to do a bit more complex stuff like this, and from there I experimented a lot. Times change and now I can do really advanced vanilla JavaScript animations. If you want to know how I did these effects, I will code them with you right now from scratch and explain everything step by step with many tips and tricks along the way. When I was learning advanced CSS animations, I did many tutorials from this channel called Online Tutorials. You probably know him. He has so much unique original content. He also has a Udemy course. If you want to support him and learn some cool effects, I will link this and some of my other favorite Udemy courses in the video description. I showed you some time ago how to turn images into flames. Today we will use a completely different and simpler technique that allows us to set any web element on fire. Then I will play with the code, experiment a bit, and I will show you how to attach any particle system we built here on the channel to any HTML element on your website. I will apply it on buttons, but it will work on any other HTML element. You can make your particles flow from frames in Image Gallery, create burning product cards for online shop. You can set fire to your website header. This code will correctly measure and apply itself to any HTML element. The choice is up to you. We are using HTML, CSS and plain vanilla JavaScript. I will code everything line by line from scratch with no frameworks and no libraries. That way, we get to build this effect while at the same time we are learning general vanilla JavaScript techniques, which can help us build many other different projects or even pass a coding interview if you are a self-taught front-end web developer looking for a job. I am here to help you master front-end web development techniques and give you all the tools you need to bring your creative ideas to life. I hope you find some value in tips and tricks I'm about to share. Are we taking web animations too far? Is it really necessary? What purpose does it serve? Well, one reason to use visually impressive animations on your website like this would be to stand out. There's a lot of competition out there these days. You better show your clients or employers something they haven't seen before if you want them to remember you. Also, it's a good coding exercise since it's all vanilla JavaScript, no frameworks and no libraries. And my third reason is because I love animations and I'm just having fun. Not everything has to be a useful web application. We also need some art in life. This is advanced effect, so if you are new to coding, maybe it's better to start with my beginner crash course, where I take time to explain all the important concepts in detail. Click the like if you are ready to set your website on fire. Let's go! In style CSS, I use asterisk selector to target all elements on the page. I do global cross-browser reset, margin 0, padding 0, box sizing set to border box. Body element will have black background. Main buttons wrapper will be set to position absolute, top 30%, left 0, with 100 viewport width. Text align center. Canvas element will have blue background so that we can see it. It defaults to this size. We will make it larger in a minute with JavaScript. Let's set it to black. We have 3 buttons here. They will be set to position relative, width 25%, height 120 pixels, margin 10 pixels. I will give it display inline block and border radius 50 pixels to get nice round edges. Border will be 5 pixels solid white and background transparent. Transition 0.5 seconds. I will give each button a before pseudo element. These elements have mandatory attribute called content. If you forget to declare it, the element won't appear at all. Position will be absolute. That way, each of these will align with its nearest parent with position set to relative or absolute. In this case, that will be our button elements. Background red so we can see it. Width 100%, height 100%, top 0, left 0, and they are finally aligned. Border radius 50 pixels. Transition 0.5 seconds. So this is how you create virtual pseudo element attached to each button. We can do a lot of cool things and animations with them. I want to target each before pseudo element separately now. I use nth child selector and each one will have different value in content. Home, shop, about, like this. On button parent, I set font size to 50 pixels. font weight to 900 to make it bold, color white. I can see we also have some text on the original buttons underneath. I go back to index.html and I remove that text. Back in style CSS, I give buttons line height 110 pixels to align them vertically. Min width will be 70 pixels. 170 pixels? No. 270 pixels? That's better. Let's do 300 for now. I remove the red background. When I hover on button element, I want its before pseudo element to get yellow text color. Box shadow will be inset 10 pixels horizontal, 10 pixels vertical, and 15 pixels spread. I use comma and I add another shadow on the other side. I add third and fourth shadow, and I adjust values like this to make it all the way around my element. It's interesting how it defaults to yellow. Never noticed that before. I guess if I don't declare color, it takes it from text color. Experiments. I give all 4 shadows additional attribute and I declare red color like this. When we hover on button, I want to give it box shadow. I copy this line. I remove inset because we want it on the outside. Nice. We are getting kinda neon light effect now. Let's change all red color to orange. I give it orange border. And maybe orange background to get rid of the small black edge. Yes. Background on pseudo element will be yellow. I like this. Text shadow will be 5 pixels, 5 pixels, 5 pixels orange. Again, I will add 3 more shadows to highlight my text from all sides. Remember that you can chain many box shadows or text shadows like this with a comma separated list. This looks nice. We are done with HTML and CSS. Let's add some JavaScript. Click like if you are ready to learn how to make flames or interactive particles come out of any HTML element. Are you excited? Then let's do it. HTML Canvas is now well supported on the web. It's very easy to set up, and I will show you right now how you can use it to create awesome easy effects. Custom variable called canvas is equal to document.getElementById canvas1. ctx is equal to canvas.getContext2d. Canvas width is window in a width and canvas height is window in a height. This will make it full screen. By resizing canvas like this, my web page gave me scroll bars. I don't want them in this project, so in style CSS I give my body element overflow hidden. Now we want to measure position and size of buttons so that my fire knows where to flow from. It's very easy. Constant variable called button elements is equal to document query selector all, and I find all elements with a class of button. Another custom variable called, for example, button measurements. This will be a let variable because when page resizes and button sizes change, my button measurements will change as well. For now, it will be an empty array. I want a reusable function that will measure my buttons and save their positions and sizes inside button measurements array from line 8. It will run on the first page load, and in a moment I will also attach it to window resize event so that the values are always accurate. Whenever this function runs, first it will always take button measurements and sets it to an empty array to delete any potential values in there. Then I take button elements from line 7, which holds a node list, array-like object that contains a reference to all 3 of my button elements, 1, 2, 3. We can call array method for each on it. Like this, and for each of my 3 buttons I take button measurements array from line 8 and I push something in there. I want to push position and size of each button in there, so I pass it button.getBoundingClientRectangle. This is a built-in JavaScript method that gives us top, left, bottom, right position and width and height of any HTML element. I declared my measure buttons function. I need to call it to run its code. If I console log button measurements from line 8, I can see something is wrong. Oh, I forgot brackets here. Yes, we have an array with 3 objects. Each of these objects was returned by getBoundingClientRectangle method, and if I open it, I can see it contains position and size values about each of our 3 buttons. Perfect. Hope you're getting some value today, and maybe you are realizing other things you could use this technique for. Let's create particles that will make up our effect. I create a custom let variable called particlesArray, and I set it equal to an empty array at first. It will store all active particles. Particle objects will be created using a JavaScript class. I call it particle. Constructor will expect 3 arguments to come from the outside: x, y, and size. It is because I want this to be dynamic and I want this particle to flow from the current element we are hovering over with mouse in that particular moment. This.x horizontal x coordinate, this.y vertical y coordinate, and size will be radius of particle circle. They will all have a weight property. I could have also called it vertical speed or something like that. I want weight to be a random number between 1.5 and 3, for example. This.direction x will be horizontal movement. Let's do a random number between 0 and 2. This will push particles slightly to the right, simulating wind that's blowing my flames from the left. Update method will calculate position for each particle for each frame. This.y minus equals this.weight will make particles rise up in a negative direction along vertical y-axis. This.x plus equals this.direction x will make particles flow to the right. I also want them to shrink, but I need to make sure size is never less than 0, because that would give us an error. We can't draw a shape with size less than 0. I say if this.size from line 24 is more or equal to 0.3, decrease this.size by 0.2 for every frame. Particles will start at their maximum size and they will slowly shrink down. Draw method will just take all these values and use them to draw circles representing each particle. CTX begin path to start drawing, CTX arc to draw a circular path, CTX fill style will be, for example, orange, and CTX fill will fill the path with color. I need to keep track which button is being hovered over by mouse so I can apply this effect to the correct one. It's easy. Not sure if you know this technique, but it's very useful for other stuff as well. I create a let variable called activeButton and I initially set it to 0. We have 3 buttons, button 0, 1, 2. These numbers correspond to indexes in button elements node list object from line 7 that holds a reference to these 3 HTML button elements. I take button elements from line 7 and I call for each built-in array method on them. For each of these 3 buttons, I want to apply event listener for mouse enter event. Whenever mouse enter event occurs, I take activeButton variable from line 41 and I set it to a different number. How do I assign numbers to each button? We can use HTML data attribute. In index.html, I give each button a data attribute like this. This will be button 0, button 1, and button 2. To access this value with JavaScript, we use dataset keyword. So activeButton equals this button with mouse enter event dot dataset dot number. Number is a custom name I gave to this data attribute. Single element can have many different data attributes. This part is mandatory, and this second part is a custom name of this data attribute. You can name it whatever you want. I can name it data.aaa, and then I pull that value with JavaScript by saying button.dataset.aaa. This is a great technique to store metadata on HTML elements that can be used with JavaScript for all kinds of cool things. I put it back to data number. So when mouse enter event happens on any of these 3 button elements, we set activeButton variable from line 41 to its data-number value. That way we always know which one of them was the last one user hovered over with the mouse. I also add mouse leave event to all my buttons. When mouse leave event happens, I set activeButton to -1. Now JavaScript can see if user is hovering over button 0, 1, 2 or none of them. Perfect. I create a custom function I call, for example, handle particles. Inside I will have a for loop to cycle through all elements that are currently inside particles array from line 19. When user is not hovering over anything, this will be empty and for loop will be skipped. For each particle inside this array, I call their associated update method from line 28 and draw method from line 33. I also want to remove particles that are very small so that we don't get endlessly growing pool of objects. If size of a particle is less than 1, I take particles array and I call built-in splice method on it. I want to remove the small particle, so I pass it index and 1, because we are removing one element at this index. Then I have to call I minus minus to adjust index of outer for loop to make sure the next element gets correctly updated and drawn after we removed its neighbor. I need to add I in square brackets on line 51 and 52 like this. Now we have a custom handle particles function which will simply cycle over all active particles, update them, draw them, and remove the old ones that have shrunk down to a small size. We have a way to handle particles, but we don't have a way to actually create them yet. Let's write a custom function called, for example, createParticle. This function will first check if active button is more than -1. If it is, it means user is currently hovering over a button. I need to measure where should we start placing the particles on canvas so that they appear as if they flow from the button. It will create 3 temporary variables called size, x and y. I will need them because my particle class constructor on line 21 expects them as arguments. Size will be a random number between 10 and 50. I need to make sure the size is smaller than the actual element if I want them to flow smoothly from behind our buttons. Horizontal coordinate from where each particle first appears will be a random number between 0 and width of a button, so button measurements from line 8 with index of active button. I hope I don't lose the beginners here. I told you this was a bit more advanced. Basically, button measurements is an array of 3 objects. Each of these objects is a DOM rectangle element that was returned by getBoundingClientRectangle, built in JavaScript method on line 12. We used it to measure position and size of our 3 buttons. So index 0 in button measurements is a DOM rectangle object with position and size data about first button. Index 1 is about this button, and index 2 is about this last button. Down here I want to pull this object and access its position data based on the currently active button that was hovered on. On purpose, I gave dataset numbers the same values as indexes in button measurements array. So if I pull active button like this, it will correctly match active button that is hovered over with a DOM rectangle object in button measurements array, which will allow me to position particles precisely behind this particular element. If you are a JavaScript beginner and you were able to follow this, congratulations. If you are confused what I just did, I have a beginner playlist where I go over many of these concepts slowly while building cool animations and games as well. I realized I'm going a bit faster today than usual. This is an advanced effect. So here on line 62, I'm pulling position and size of currently active button element, and I want to make sure the particles appear randomly along its width, so along this area from here to here. X coordinate will be a random number between 0 and this button's current width. It needs a small tweak, but let's animate it and then fix it. It will be easier to understand what's going on when we have some visuals. Vertical Y coordinate, where particles first appear, will be Y value of this active button plus, let's say, 40 pixels. You could also say size divided by 2 or something to make it dynamic. Now we calculated size, x and y of one particle. I take particles array from line 19 and I call built-in array push method on it. I will push new particle, which will trigger particle class constructor on line 21. Constructor expects x, y and size, so I pass it x, y and size variables we just calculated between lines 61 and 63. You need to pass them in the same order that class constructor expects, otherwise it won't work. Perfect, we have createParticle custom method that will check if user hovers over any buttons. It will calculate size and coordinates based on which of these 3 buttons we are hovering over. It will use these values to create one new particle using our custom particle class, and it will push it into particles array. If you are a beginner and you are following along, you are doing great so far. Well done. We are using a lot of vanilla JavaScript features that will be very useful to you in your future web development career. I hope that building memorable projects like this will help you remember these built-in JavaScript methods a bit better when you need them. Let's create animation loop to make things move. Custom function, I call, for example, animate. Clear rectangle method to clear old frames of animation. Then I call createParticle from line 59, which will create one particle under currently active button. And I call handleParticles from line 49 that will update and draw all currently active particles. requestAnimationFrame, and I pass it animate from line 67 to create endless animation loop. I call animate to start the first loop. It kind of works and then it freezes. There's an error somewhere. Let's see. My browser console tells me the error is on line 54, some issue with splice method. Splice method is called on the whole array, but I'm calling it on a single index in the array. This is wrong. I need to fix it like this. Nice. We have particles appearing and shrinking on canvas. As you can see, they don't match the button horizontally. The issue is here on line 62. I'm saying the initial horizontal x-coordinate is between 0 and button width, which will place it between here and here. We actually need to account for the distance from left edge of screen as well, so plus active button x, like this. Much better. We are getting there fast now. You can see particles pop in on sides. I want to make the initial horizontal area a little bit more narrow, so that particles always appear behind the edges of button and smoothly flow from behind it. To do that, I want the random number range to be button width minus size of the particle. I need to do size times 2 because we want it to be offset from both left and right edge. Now that I made the area where particles appear more narrow, I also need to push it to the right a little bit to center it behind the button, so plus size from line 61. Perfect, now we don't see the particles pop into existence on the sides, they just smoothly flow from behind the button. This is starting to look really good. Do you like it? Some people might think this is too visual and too much to put on a website. It's up to personal choice, I think. If you want to stand out in competition as a front-end web developer, you might need to do something more visual maybe. Also, you don't need to use it if you don't want to. We are using vanilla JavaScript, so you can take this project as a coding exercise to practice and improve your coding skills. When I resize page, the particles don't match button positions anymore unless I reload it. This can be fixed very easily and we will do it in a second. This effect will be fully automatic and responsive. To create fire effect, same as I did in this liquid image tutorial, I will use CSS filters. I apply a blur on canvas first. Let's try 10 pixels. Why does my blur make my buttons disappear? Let's add contrast of 5. This will sharpen the edges and make it look more like flames. I will place canvas behind my buttons to make sure they are displayed correctly. I never realized CSS filters affect other elements behind them like this. Interesting. Anyway, now it works and we have flames. When I resize window, the positions are not correct anymore. I only scan buttons with getBoundingClientRectangle once on the initial page load here. I also need to call my custom measure buttons function every time resize event occurs, like this. First, I make sure canvas width and canvas height change with window size, and then I call my measure buttons function again. By the way, it animates on first page load because of this active button being set to 0 at first. Let's set it to -1 initially. Now it works correctly. I resize the window to test it. Yes, it still works. Button coordinates and the sizes are being correctly tracked as they change. Awesome. This fire is basically a particle effect. I can change any of its values here in update method to make it behave differently. If you watch some of my other tutorials, you know I made many different particle effects. You can use any of them here. Do you want bubbles to flow from your buttons? Constellations effect? Liquid falling down from it? Shooting bouncing balls, rainbow stars, rotating images. Everything will work with this code base. It's compatible with all my other courses, and any particle effect I made can be attached to this. I will leave it up to your creativity. My favorite part every time I code is when I'm at this stage and tweaking values and playing with it to see what comes out. That's why I call my channel Laboratory. I love creative coding experiments and rapid prototyping. You can also change the way fire looks like by changing values we pass to blur and contrast filter in CSS. Let's remove the filter to see the actual particles. I will show you how to transform this into a completely different hover effect. This is a bonus experiment section, so I will go much faster. I remove line 30 and I make particles fall straight down. Transition will be 0.2 seconds. I remove all box shadows and text shadows. Color will be white and black, for example. I give button black background. I remove its hover styles completely. I give it text stroke CSS property. Color on hover will be black. Remove background on hover and I put it on base before element. Transition 0.4 will be better. I'm just experimenting now, feel free to style it differently. In Script.js I set fill style to white. I set active button to 1 on line 40 so that the animation plays while we are changing values. Instead of drawing a circle, I'm gonna draw a rectangle. Fill style white. Now we have falling squares. Interesting. I want to create kind of digital graph particle effect. Let's see. I'm gonna connect squares that are close enough with lines. This effect was made popular by Particles.js library, but it's easy to write in vanilla JavaScript. I'm going fast now, but if you want this effect explained for complete beginners, check out my HTML Canvas crash course where I explain every single detail about this. To compare every particle against every other particle in the same array, I create a nested for loop on line 48. I calculate horizontal distance dx, vertical distance dy, and Pythagoras theorem formula will allow me to calculate distance between these 2 points. If distance is less than 80, I start drawing a line. CTX move to is the starting point of that line, so x and y of particle I from the outer loop. CTX line 2 is the end point, so x and y of particle y from the inner loop. I stroke the path and we get something a bit nicer here. I want opacity of lines to be dynamic. Today just a quick hack. Let's make it connected to size of these two particles. Divided by 70. Divided by 80. This looks better, yeah. This is a solid code base, you can play with it. Apply different particle effects and see what looks good and matches well with the rest of your website. If you are still in creative mood, check out the video description for some recommended videos I picked for you. Thanks for spending your time with me. See you soon!